Hello, this is Bible class, a Wednesday night Bible class for March 25th, 2020 for the Bridgewood Church of Christ. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you're watching this live at 7 o'clock. If not, if you're watching it later on, that is fine too. But we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 14. We're going to continue moving on with our Together We Grow curriculum, try to keep on track with where we need to be. So for our teachers, just keep that in mind that when we do start meeting in person again, we're going to pick up with the topic for the date. So we're going to try and cover this material as we go. Obviously, we're not going to do as good a job as our teachers can do in a classroom, but we have the opportunity right now with many of us being working from home and the kids being home to really delve into the scripture and cover these topics on our own at home too. So we look for the positive in the situations that we face. We'll spend about 20 minutes together in class here, and then at 7:30 we'll have a Zoom video chat where we can talk about a few questions from the material tonight, discuss a few things for about 30 minutes. So our time tonight, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, our normal assembly times for a Wednesday evening service. We hope that you'll join us on Zoom using the instructions you should have gotten in your email if you're a member at the Bridgewood Church of Christ. We do want you to hear that while we appreciate this technology, we long for the day where we can all be together again in one building, one place, worshiping God together. I long for that day. I miss seeing you. I'm praying for you, and I'm also praying for the day when we can be together again safely, recognizing that we're taking these actions right now to protect the health of the body and the health of our community in these unique circumstances that we find ourselves in. One more note, before we start class. If you're in my class, you know that I usually make several announcements, before we get going. I'm going to use a bit of privilege tonight in the fact that we're not going to cover what our assigned topic is. Our assigned topic in the curriculum is the confrontation between Saul and David that you see in 1 Samuel 18 through 20 as that's playing out. I couldn't pass by 1 Samuel 17, David and Goliath. I just think it's such an appropriate passage for us right now. David, servant of God, facing a giant with God on his side. We're facing a giant too. And so that's going to be the kind of the bulk of our study tonight. As far as our curriculum is concerned, it'll be okay because we're getting ready to transition to the New Testament portion of our study. If you haven't heard, our curriculum, the way it's set out, is a quarter of Old Testament, quarter of New Testament, making those connections between the Old Testament and New Testament, giving that big picture of how the Bible fits together so amazingly, only in a way that God could have created it. And so we'll be our next quarter in the New Testament, and then in, I think it's July or so, we'll come back and we'll pick up with David. So by then, hopefully things will be back to normal, and you can teach a great class in person about David and Goliath again. An event in the Bible that never gets old. So let's get into the text. I hope that you're blessed by this time together as we study together. Back in verse 11 is really where we're going to pick up 1 Samuel 16. You remember last week that Samuel had been sent by God to anoint a new king. His king, Saul, was out. And so he's been sent to the house of Jesse in Bethlehem. And you'll recall how all of Jesse's sons came before Samuel, starting with the oldest, Eliab, who looked the part of a king, but God said that wasn't his choice. Went through all the sons, said, "Do you have any more?" And they called in the youngest from herding the sheep. It was David. In verse 11 we read, "Then Samuel said to Jesse, are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains the youngest, but behold, he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here." And he sent and brought him, and now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. And the Lord said, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he." This is the king. And then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. Now, one of the curiosity questions that always comes up about this text is, how old was David when he was anointed to be king? The only real age that we know for David is that he became king when he was 30 years old. And he reigned for 40 years. So everything else you're just trying to kind of put into place. We're not going to spend too much time chatting about this because we don't want to get lost in the chasing rabbits and so forth. But we know that David, of course, wasn't in the army. Later on when he goes to see his brothers, what we'll read here in a little bit in 1 Samuel 17, he wasn't in the army, and so there was, at 20 was about the age where you would join the army. And also the fact that David was out herding the sheep, he was the youngest, gives us some context of David probably being, 12 to 15 years old, something like that. That's probably a good assumption at this point for this text here in 1 Samuel 16. Like I said, it's not really here nor there. We know that David's a little bit older when he goes to fight Goliath. But it's something that people like to talk about and like to consider, so wanted to address it for just a second. Maybe tonight in Zoom, you can share your perspective on that, so I look forward to hearing that here in a few minutes. Back to our text, 1 Samuel 16, verse 14. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. I believe perhaps a more accurate translation is just the idea that the Spirit of the Lord left Saul. We know that he received the Spirit from the Lord of leadership and so forth when he became king. But when Saul was fired from being king, dismissed, the Spirit of the Lord would have left him too. And that vacuum, that void, would also torment him. So that's another option for this passage. It could have been that he was punished for his failure as a king of God's people too. But either way, we read that this is really the beginning point of that downward spiral of mental instability as it's played out for Saul. Verse 15, and Saul's servant said to him, Behold, now a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre. So your version may say harp, a small stringed instrument. Let's see here. And when the harmful spirit from God is upon you, he will play it and you will be well. So the original music therapy, I guess. So when you start getting into this dark place, we'll play for you and everything will be better. So Saul said to his servants, Provide for me a man who can play well and bring him to me. One of the young men answered, Behold, I have seen a young son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence. And the Lord is with him. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, Send me David your son, who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey laden with bread and a skin of wine and a young goat, and sent them by David to his son to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer, or kind of an aide, as it were. But David was a likable fellow. We see that all throughout his life, in a natural leader. And so we recognize that role in his life. Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight. And whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him. So that seemed to be something that David came back and forth doing, and we learn later while tending to his other responsibilities. Now, we're going to jump into 1 Samuel 17, where I really want to be tonight. The Bible sets the stage for this battle with the Philistines. Hopefully I'm going to be able to add in a map here. If not, look in the back of your Bible. But the 5 fortified cities of the Philistines along the coast, Gezer, Ekron, Gath, Eglon, and Gerar. And then this valley between Soko and Azekah on the map, this valley where they're going to line up. So let's take a look at that on the map, kind of get that in our minds and realize that the Philistines, very intimidating to the people in the area. So, chapter 17. Verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies for battle, and they were gathered at Soko, which belongs to Judah, and encamped between Soko and Azekah in Ephes Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in line of battle against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side with a valley between them. So with probably thousands of soldiers, army on either side, the battle set for, or the scene is set for a very bloody battle in this valley. Verse 4. There came out from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So you might remember that 6 cubits, about 18 inches. So Goliath stood a little over 9 feet tall, is what we're being told here. That is big. I remember back when I was a sports intern back in college at NBC5. And one of the things I did back then was go out and interview players after games, and so interviewing Dirk Nowitzki. And so I remember my arm going numb when I was holding the microphone up to his mouth. Dirk Nowitzki, 7 feet tall, pretty good reach up there to put that microphone up there for him. For me, at I think 5'11". And so that Dirk 7, Goliath 9+, would make Shaq and Dirk and all these other guys, really tall guys in the NBA, look pretty small. And also remember that Goliath from Gath, remember where that is on our map. It's always good to kind of keep that perspective. These are real events, these are real people, real places. It's always something that I like to emphasize in my classes. Goliath, verse 5, had a helmet of bronze on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail armor. And the weight of that coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze, or best guess, probably over 100 pounds, maybe 125 pounds worth of armor. Verse 6, he had bronze armor on his legs and a javelin of bronze slung between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam. We could compare that to like a 2x4. And his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, or about maybe 15 pounds. And he had a shield bearer that went before him. So Goliath looks up at the ridge line there, the thousands of Israelites up on the hill, and taunts them, heckles them. Verse 8, he stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why have you come out to draw up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistines said, "I defy the ranks of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. They were shaking in their boots. One man, even a 9-foot tall man, but one man sends fear among thousands of seasoned soldiers. We know that they've fought many battles by this point. Now, hearing the taunt of the Philistines, who should have risen up to go out and fight Goliath? Who should have risen up to fight Goliath? Well, obviously it would have been Saul, right? Saul was the king. They wanted a king to go out before them into battle, to lead them into battle. Saul stood a foot tall, or head tall, above every other Israelite. And so, yeah, he was a natural choice. But the text clearly says, when Saul and all Israel heard this, they shook in their boots. So, once again, Saul's not doing what he's supposed to be doing. Verse 12, now David was the son of an Ephrathite of Bethlehem in Judah named Jesse, who had 8 sons. In the days of Saul, the man was already old and advanced in years. The 3 oldest sons of Jesse had followed Saul to battle. And the names of his 3 sons who went to the battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 eldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. For 40 days the Philistine came forward and took his stand morning and evening. So 40 days they do this. And Jesse said to David his son, take for your brothers an ephah of this parched grain and these 10 loaves, and carry them quickly to the camp to your brothers. Also take these 10 cheeses to the commander of their 1,000. See if your brothers are well, and bring some token from them. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So Jesse sends his youngest son to go take provisions to his brothers at the front lines, take a gift, and to bring back a report of how things are going. David rose early, verse 20. David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took the provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him and came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line shouting the war cry. So think about that for a second. Let me finish verse 21. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. Okay? So picture that. If this was 40 days, right? Every day they go out there, they line up. You got the Philistines, you got the Israelites. Goliath comes out and taunts them for 40 days. If you're a soldier, you're putting on your gear, you're gearing up for war. They do their war cry, they line up, and then every day you go back to camp defeated. How do you think morale was doing? Okay? Verse 22, David left the things in charge of the keeper, things he brought of the baggage, and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, Goliath, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And this time David heard him. All the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. Could you imagine that day after day after day being scared by this guy? And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches, and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. You're going to be rich, you're going to be royalty, and you're going to be tax-free. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills a Philistine and takes away the reproach of Israel? Basically, what'd you just say? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way, so it shall be done to the man who kills this Philistine. So, quite the advancement there. You're going to be rich, you're going to be royalty, no taxes for life for your family. Verse 28, now Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? Was it not but a word? And he turned away from him and toward another, and spoke in the same way, and the people answered him again in the same way. Typical exchange between big brother and little brother, right? What have I done now? Stop coming up here and, trying to be bigger than you really are. So, entertaining that's in there. Verse 31, when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight him, for you are but a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. So I'm picturing late teens for David, probably like 16 to 19, somewhere in there. Not quite old enough to be in the army, but still a youth. Verse 34, David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Now remember that the Bible only records 3 people who killed a lion with their bare hands. Samson being one of those. We studied about that not too long ago. David being the other, and Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, would be the other one. And so David said, this uncircumcised Philistine will be just like that lion. So Saul is convinced and lets him go. Verse 38, then Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. And David strapped his sword over his armor, and he tried in vain to go, for he had not tested them. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. The armor was made for Saul. It wasn't made for David. It was tailored to someone who was really tall and was a warrior. And so David put them off. Verse 40, he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. Now, of course, that sling, not a slingshot that we think of like today, why with the rubber band thing. This being a very deadly weapon, 3 foot or so piece of leather with a pouch at the end, swung around. When that projectile is released, one of these smooth stones, by an expert hand like David's, 150 miles an hour or more isn't out of question, is how fast that projectile is coming at you. So, of course, very deadly. And I always like to think about the fact that David took 5 stones with him, right? Very confident, trusting in God, but took 5 stones. He was prepared, right? The whole lesson right there in that one statement. The Philistine, verse 41, moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him. He hated him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, so by the gods of the Philistines, a polytheistic culture. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Then David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the hosts of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone and slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath, and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath at the gates of Ekron, so that the wounded of the Philistines fell on the way from Sharim as far as Gath and Ekron. Imagine that, 40 days you've been prepping up for this thing, gone back in defeat, and then, whoa, let's go get him, right? And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor back in his tent. As soon as Saul saw David going out against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As your soul lives, O king, I do not know." And the king said, "Inquire whose son the boy is." And as soon as David returned from striking down the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, the head of the Philistine, with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." Nobody would have identified this with the lyre player, the harp player that have been in the previous text, and there's a whole discussion about that. We're not going to get into it right now because it doesn't particularly matter to what we're talking about today. I just want you to think about the idea of the fact that God was with his servant David, and God is the one who won that victory against the giant. David knew it. The Israelites knew it, and the whole land knew it. And we could use a reminder of the God who will see us through the challenges that we face all throughout life, the God who fights our battles for us. We use wisdom and preparation just like David did, but God sees us through these challenging events. The message here being keep faith, be brave, be smart, and many more. I look forward to taking and talking about the gleanings that you have from this biblical event in our Zoom conference here in a little bit. I think it's going to be a great and encouraging conversation. I hope you'll join us. If not, thank you for joining us for Bible class. God bless you, and we'll look forward to more encouragement together from God's Word in the coming days.